Says Michael Popok, Legal AF, with breaking news. It looks like Fani Willis, the prosecutor in Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia, is ever closer to issuing her final report in the next week or two and moving towards indicting, including Donald Trump, possibly other targets such as Rudy Giuliani, Mike Flynn, and Mark Meadows, and potentially Lindsey Graham for their work, coordinated work and conspiracy to interfere with the election process in Georgia, tried to extort the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to find 11,700 more votes in order for Trump to overcome Biden's victory in Georgia. And in addition, there was a fake elector scandal also in Georgia. And there are 16 people, including members of the Republican Party of Georgia and elected officials from Georgia, who were part of the fake elector scheme that Fani Willis is also investigating. Now, this is interesting because Fani Willis does not have to wait under Georgia procedural law for the report to even be issued and sent to the chief judge of Fulton County, Judge McBurney. Yes, she can do that and then have McBurney consult with her about whether it would be appropriate to impanel a regular grand jury to issue the indictments. But if Fani Willis and her team believe that they have sufficient evidence now on probable cause to go to a grand jury to obtain an indictment against Donald Trump and others, she can do that. Even as we speak, even as I am giving this hot take about the event, Fani Willis could be going in and getting a indictment, a sealed indictment against Donald Trump, and she doesn't have to wait any longer. I think Fani Willis is moving as fast as possible so that her investigation and prosecution takes the driver's seat, with one caveat. It has now been confirmed that Jack Smith, the special counsel, is also very interested in Trump's misconduct and potential criminal conduct in Georgia in making that now infamous phone call, along with Mark Meadows, to Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's Secretary of State. It is the one piece of evidence, that of Trump making the phone call himself, which lies at the heart of this prosecution, which distinguishes it from all the other Jan 6th and other prosecutions against Donald Trump, because not only are his fingerprints on it, there's actual physical evidence, in this case, a recorded phone call by Brad Raffensperger, where Trump is doing his own bidding as opposed to using buffers and lawyers to improperly interfere with the election. Fani Willis's investigation has the goods on Donald Trump because he was stupid enough to make that phone call. Jack Smith wants the feds, the Department of Justice, to also investigate federal law violations involving Donald Trump and the interference with the Georgia election process and interference through the fake elector scheme and his role in that. And so don't be surprised if Jack Smith sort of Bigfoots the investigation in Georgia, as usually happens, and the feds take priority and precedence. They have already issued, since Thanksgiving, Jack Smith's team of prosecutors has issued their own subpoenas to people like Brad Raffensperger so that they can get their own evidence in order for their potential prosecution of Donald Trump as well. And these things may not run in parallel, everyone. It may not be Fani Willis's team of state prosecutors on state law violations, including racketeering, which Fani Willis has said is maybe an appropriate charge, to tie together in a conspiracy Donald Trump, Giuliani, Mike Flynn, Meadows, Boris Epshteyn, the lawyer for Donald Trump, the consigliere for Donald Trump, in this web of a conspiracy. But the feds have their own body of law and prosecutorial tools that may take precedent and bump back Fani Willis and let the feds get into the driver's seat, and Fani Willis would have to wait to prosecute hers in coordination with the federal the federal prosecutors of the Department of Justice. We'll have to wait and see. But Jack Smith is very interested in everything that Fani Willis has been interested in Georgia, but this time from the federal side of things. So we're going to have to wait ultimately to see what happens with Fani Willis and her prosecution. But again, The road splits in front of her. She can either wait for the full report to be issued and then seek indictments from a regular grand jury, or she can skip a step, wait for the full report to come out, but at the same time, without waiting another week or month longer, go right to a regular grand jury and get indictments against people like Donald Trump for things like racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction, and interference with Georgia election law. And many in her office, the reporting is so far, thought they would be able to recommend or go for indictments in December, but were delayed by the various motion practice and court appearances by Mark Meadows, who ran to South Carolina. Mark Meadows, who ran to, his local courthouse, Lindsey Graham, who ran to federal court in Georgia, and the like. And all of these things delayed Fani Willis in her investigation, but she's making up for lost time now. However, fast on her heels here comes Jack Smith, as we've talked about before. And this flurry of subpoenas, as we joked on Legal AF, it's raining subpoenas issued by Jack Smith. That is a sign that things are heating up and have moved into a completely new phase by the Department of Justice in a way that we hadn't seen before. Just the fact that he is moving so rapidly to get testimony, to get subpoenaed information. In some cases, information that the Department of Justice didn't move for 700 days to obtain, Jack Smith did it in a month and a half. It just shows you again that the appointment, which was really a brilliant masterstroke by Merrick Garland, to appoint an independent special counsel, one who's so independent that not only is he an independent, having never voted Republican or Democrat since he's been a prosecutor, but he wasn't even in the country for most of the Trump presidency and had been prosecuting war criminals at The Hague. Not only that, but just showing this a separation, if you will, from the day-to-day Department of Justice is going to be very effective. I mean, the Jan 6 committee sits in a weird place. 4 members of the committee, and they sit on a subcommittee, happen to be lawyers. But only one of them was a prosecutor at any point in his life, and that's Adam Schiff. Most of the elected officials that sit there, most of them being Democrat elected, are not lawyers. They're sifting through lots of evidence in a very sophisticated way. But let's be frank, Benny Thompson is not Jack Smith. He's not a prosecutor. He doesn't have the Department of Justice prosecutorial manual or prosecutorial discretion that he's ever exercised in his life to bring an indictment against somebody or to prosecute somebody. Not to belittle the Jan 6 committee and all the amazing work that they did with 1,000 witnesses under oath and in statements and hundreds of thousands of documents, but the Department of Justice is moving with velocity past whatever the Jan 6 committee has accomplished. It has developed now a body of work that actually surpasses that of the Jan 6 committee because they've been able to get all those lawyers like Pat Cipollone and others who originally said attorney-client privilege. Well, the Department of Justice was able to get the attorney-client privilege stripped away from them, and people like John Eastman and Boris Epshteyn to force them to testify in a way that the Jan 6 committee was powerless to do. So now the quality of the body of evidence that the Department of Justice has developed surpasses even that of what the Jan 6 committee was able to do. And they're looking at this new evidence, all these emails, testimony of lawyers, testimony of people who originally had asserted the executive privilege, like non-lawyers who were in the West Wing, or even lawyers who were in the West Wing, and all the executive privileges have been stripped away through the Department of Justice in their motion practice in front of the chief judge in the D.C. Circuit, Judge Beryl Howell, who's responsible for all grand juries and making all of these really important, hard decisions in a court of law, all in favor of the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice now is in a different place than the Jan 6 committee is. Yes, they're going to make a recommendation based on the static evidence as it was developed by the Jan 6 committee and its investigators. But the new information that has now been developed in the last 5 or 6 months, and in the last 2 or 3 months since Jack Smith has been involved, is of a better quality than that of the Jan 6, because they've gotten all of the testimony from all of these lawyers and West Wing people. And they're under different standards than the Jan 6 committees. Different lens, different set of eyes, different standards, now different body of evidence that has been developed by the Department of Justice. What I would like the Jan 6 committee to do is to finally and fully turn over all of their information, the 1,000 witness statements, the hundreds of thousands of documents, to the Department of Justice. Everybody believes or had thought that had already been going on. And it's not the Department of Justice's fault, because they've made several demands on Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney and the panel as a whole to get that information, including just before Jack Smith was appointed. To date, that hasn't happened. There's been very limited cooperation by the Jan 6 committee. That's been because they've been very territorial. Well, the brilliant masterstroke of Merrick Garland is to appoint this independent special counsel who's not political, because the Jan 6 committee recommendations, made mainly by Democrats or Republicans who have already lost in their primaries and were not reelected to Congress, and therefore are seen as an axe to grind, like Liz Cheney, they're making criminal referrals. It's better to have an independent special counsel evaluate the evidence on his own, which they are now in the process of doing. So we're going to have to watch how all of this shakes out, with the House Ways and Means Committee voting this week to issue the tax returns, which would end up immediately in the hands of Letitia James in New York, who is the Attorney General, who's brought a $250 million plus civil fraud case against Donald Trump and his children for how they operated their business. Those tax returns will be very important and very interesting as potential evidence for Letitia James and all the other prosecutors around the country that have potential cases, and civil lawyers who have potential cases, because there's at least 5 or 6 other civil cases going on around the country against Donald Trump, including for defamation and for fraud related to his business practices. So you got House Ways and Means Committee this upcoming week voting to release the tax returns, which will be a boon to all prosecutions and investigations. You got the Jan 6 committee wrapping it up and putting a bow around their work, and the issuance finally of a final report, which will probably be thousands of pages long that we'll all get to read. Fani Willis about to issue her report, and at any moment being able to go to the regular grand jury in Fulton County, and Jack Smith bringing up the rear, who could surpass all of these investigations. And of course, he does have the power to bring federal prosecutions and indictments against people, and has grand juries already in place in order to do that. So if I was a betting person, I would put my bet now on Jack Smith to jump to the front of the class and to the head of the line in his prosecutions, as long as he believes he's got the body of evidence to sustain a prosecution and a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt against Donald Trump and others. This is Michael Popok reporting for Legal AF about developments about Fani Willis, the Fulton County prosecutor, and the delivery of her final report and recommendation and ability to indict Trump at any moment.
MeidasTouch is unapologetically pro-democracy. And look, we know you are too. So please make sure you check out our best-selling shirt and our best-selling gear, the unapologetically pro-democracy gear. And hey, while you're at it, make sure you check out my favorite shirt and one of our most famous designs, It Wasn't Rigged, You're Just a Loser, at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.